Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Truth and Law. My name is Konrad Rogoz, your host, and I'm here with my good friend. I'm excited to have him on the show, and I'm gonna let him introduce himself. I'll give a brief intro because we're already dealing with some technical difficulties, so we're hitting it on the fly. And man, my friend Michael Morris from EvolvingSeeds.com, um, an activist of over 30 years. Tell the people, say hi to the people, and tell them what you're about.
Good day to the viewership out there. I have been in a solution, like you said, a solutions focused or an activist for 30 years. I've always noticed the inequities and the inconsistencies and the ways, the shortcomings really, where clearly things were not operating in a way that was beneficial to any or even many, but just a small few, and those few claimed abilities and authority that I didn't find to be valid. I couldn't prove it using the scientific method or reason or logic with myself. So I started down the long path to truth discovery and refinement of self and activism. Because as far as I'm concerned, the tiers of activism is you're supposed to be an activist for self. So people who don't identify as an activist, it's really sad that you should be identifying at least as an activist for self. By extension, you should be an activist for your extended family, and by extension of that, you should be an activist for your community and the global organism at large. And so that's what really kept me doing this work, and seeing it get increasingly bad prompted me to always stay consistent. I am a career activist. This is what I do that brings me social satisfaction and involvement in this little game that we're calling life. So that's what prompted me to get going.
I like that you started with the self because this is a thing I've been asked recently, and I've been thinking about this, and it's a bit of a paradox, right? People ask me now, "Oh, you're doing all this. Do you think you're going to save the world? You're sacrificing all this for the world," and I don't really see it that way. And then like your website is great. People should go to evolvingseeds.com. There's so much information out there, and you're really doing the stuff that I would classically think of as helping others. Helping the elderly, helping people who like really need that hands-on help. For me, I'm making videos. I'm talking about ideas. Just talking like we are right now. But what I was getting to is that I don't really see it as I'm sacrificing myself for others in that classical sense. I'm doing this because it makes me happy. So I could be the best version of myself, and everybody else has a chance to do the same. And I like that your circles of activism starts with the self, because you can't just want to help everybody if you're not really doing the best for you.
Right.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Oh, here it is. This is how important the self is. Our logo. If you guys have ever seen our logo, EvolvingSeeds.com, the seeds on Evolving Seeds, clearly the E stands for evolving, but these three seeds stand for your thoughts, emotions, and actions. Because as Mark so eloquently pointed out, those are the only three ways that we can ever express ourselves in a three-dimensional reality. So it starts with the self. And I have a disabled brother. My brother suffers from cerebral palsy and epilepsy, and he helped refine my activism, because as I've stated before with other individuals, is that when you are faced with some kind of disability, you don't get to deny that disability. A person that doesn't have legs doesn't get to say, all right, well, I'm done experiencing that. I'm going to go ahead and stand up and walk now on my legs. They don't have that ability. They cannot negate or cognitive dissonance. They have to work through that shit if they experience it at all, because the reality still continues to perpetually be the reality that, like in my brother's case, he can't get up and walk by himself. He can't feed himself. So that is a reality that he can't escape, and he's intelligent enough to understand that. And so when growing up inside of a home where there's a special needs individual, namely my baby brother, it refined my activism in a way that said, I know that the United States government and governments at large are suppressing beneficial treatments and technologies that could, and capitalism is suppressing those things that could benefit my brother. So it was always very, very personal to me. And when moving forward, I observed reality from an objective standpoint. And that's one thing people don't understand, that if your thoughts are one thing and your emotions are another thing, and your actions are going to be based on those thoughts and emotions. And if those thoughts and emotions are based on utter bullshit, trash concepts, your actions will inevitably reflect those thoughts and emotions. And since most people are running on this outdated ass, backwards ass, dysfunctional programming, it is expressing itself in the aggregate. And now you can see that we can't even have conversations how we're having. And even in disagreements or agreements, like there's so many people out there who are arguing and they agree. So,
yeah. They're arguing about the words.
They're arguing about the words, and it's crazy because part of it is the words. Part of it is the language, because we're not speaking the same language. And even in classical communications between lovers, between friends, between employees and employers, anybody, we have been rarely speaking the same language. When I say understand, one person thinks I'm talking about comprehend, where another person identifies that I might be talking about standing under a claim of authority.
Yeah.
So it's very universal and very broad. So we have to begin to specify it.
And I'll give you a real time example of one of those words, and how to most people this could have gone left already, because how you correctly said that capitalism is part of the reason that your brother is suffering in the injustice that he's suffering, and you all are experiencing that injustice, your whole family. You said that capitalism does that, and what you're saying is that the way the financial system is structured, and under the illusion of the free market, which is not actually free, right. And then the government regulations that enable these people to do immoral things for money, and then keep the people from keeping the fruits of their labor to be able to help our families, to be able to help people like your brother. Most people are going to hear, oh, he talked bad about capitalism, but I believe in capitalism. That's my belief. So they would have already took that personally, whereas we actually agree. And you correctly said that it's not only the government, it is also capitalism. But then somebody else, the way they're using the term capitalism, they're trying to talk about the concept of free market, and they think that you just argued against complete freedom of economics.
Right.
But we're really on the same side, and that's perfect that you started with that, because this is just how it goes. When people don't have that, when people don't have their knowledge and their principles in order, they don't speak the same language. You've got book definitions, then you've got emotional definitions. You've got different thought definitions, different emotional definitions.
How they function in practice.
Yeah, and how they function in practice. So, it's exactly right how you said that.
It's crazy because, and you can see this going through, like I was in a group on TikTok, a black platform, where everybody on the panel was black. And I said, the question was, do you identify as an African American? And is there such a thing? And I was like, no, on both accounts. And I said, I identify as a prisoner of war. And they got so mad. And I was like, why are you mad? Like, I thought, like, it doesn't even matter what skin color you are. If you care about yourself at all, you should be knowing by now that you're a prisoner of war. You may not be a mental or spiritual prisoner of war, but you're certainly a physical prisoner of war. And people will argue all up and down about how they can get a passport and go anywhere in the world, but you can't go anywhere in the world without permission. You can't go anywhere without permission. You can't do anything without permission. And so we come in with honesty. And I love how you always talk about being honest and honest with self, because that's where, like, I knew this is where, and this should show people that call themselves intelligent human beings, especially so-called adults. This is how fucking stupid most people are. I knew and I felt that I was being subjugated the moment I found out that I needed a fishing license to go fishing. I knew the government, this was 6 years old when my dad said we're going to go fishing. And he said we're going to go to Kmart, because Walmart wasn't even a thing like that. He said, we're going to go to Kmart and get us some fishing poles and go fishing. I was like, great, let's go do that. And then we got to Kmart and he's like, we got to go get a fishing license. I was like, what is that? And he said, we got to go get a permit to go fishing. And I was like permission? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, but I thought they said that I just went to the first grade or kindergarten and they said that we're free and I got to say the Pledge of Allegiance because we're free. What part of freedom is later on, whilst already in a state of freedom, what part of freedom is me having to go pay for pay? Getting permission is bad enough, but paying to get that permission, I couldn't believe it. 6 years old, and I'm finding out that you got to get permission to go fishing, and I couldn't believe it. And then my dad, rightfully so, tried to inform me that most people would justify that, saying that if not, we would overfish. But everybody ain't going fishing at the same time. We can hardly get out the house now. And so everybody who wants to go get if everybody who wanted to go get a fishing license right now went to go get a fishing license, everybody would get one. So there's no reason to say that we would overfish anything if we didn't need a fishing license, because we wouldn't all be going fishing at the same time, similarly to the way we're not all going to get a fishing license to go fishing right now at the same time. But it's just that simple realization and the honesty in that, and never turning away from that realization, being able to 32 years later bring it up in a conversation with you as an experience and to express to others how fundamentally not free you are. In fact, the entire concept of a permit is permission. It's a fucking abbreviation. It's an abbreviation. Permit is abbreviation for permission.
Yeah.
People who are free don't need permission. And I rightfully and very eloquently made a video. There was a nice lady who was standing up for the black community, and she said, black people just want the ability to be left alone. We want the freedom to be left alone. Yes. No, she said we want the right to be left alone, and we want the right to organize ourselves and dictate our own destiny, similar to what Malcolm X said in the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And I said, that is incorrect. That is incorrect, because the black community doesn't want the right to do anything. My kids have the right to go in the kitchen and go get milk out of the refrigerator and go get water out of the refrigerator. They have the right to go to the restroom. They don't need to go ask permission for that. But the assumption, the presumption of that right is bestowed to them by me and their mom and the quality and the experiences of our parenting, so that they're able to go, they have the right to go do those things, because we bestow that ability on them in our house. But I don't have the right to go get milk and water out of my refrigerator. I don't have the right to go use the restroom. I have the freedom. The restroom is kind of a bad idea because we all have the right to use the restroom. But the right to go in the refrigerator and get whatever we want out of the refrigerator, that's something that we bestow upon our kids. So the black community doesn't want to bestowed the right to do anything, because then that implies that there is a grantor, an authority figure that's higher to grant that right to you or to deny it. We want the freedom to dictate our destiny. We want the freedom. That implies space. It even implies space auditorily to the ears. We want the freedom to dictate our own destiny, not the right, because the right is something we already possess, inherent. But the freedom is something that we are not able to access. And I'm not talking about we as the black community, but anybody. We want the freedom to dictate our lives, and we do not have that.
Exactly. To say you want the right to do something is already incorrect, because it implies that somebody could give that right to you. Of course, the right is inherent, right? But and you're right about what is really necessary is the freedom. But then if we really, really get down to it, and this, has taken me time, and also this is thanks to, learning from Mark Passio, from others, it's not really so much about what do we want, it's about what will we do. Because we if we already have the right, and all that's left is what we will do. But I'm happy you mentioned your children, that they have that right too. And I would even go a step further, because I like to say that children are not property of parents, as many people will say that children are property of their parents.
Right.
The parents allow, if they're good parents, you're allowing.
That's the word I meant, not the right, but the allowing of.
Yeah, a parent's job is to be as small of an obstacle between a child and the flowering and achieving the potential of fulfilling their rights. That's the way I see it. But just to take it back even further, you mentioned your father and how you, at 6 years old, were able to notice that intrusion of your freedom. And I thought that's profound to me, because at 6, I think he must have been doing a real good job to even foster that type of, because that's depth of thought. You clearly had a free mind from young to even see that.
I was so upset. I'm still upset about it.
I'm
Because
upset for you. It's
my
ridiculous.
dad taught me a little bit of history, but the history that I was learning already in school and with my father led me to believe and understand that throughout human history we had been fishing for free without permission as one of the basic things that a human being was able and had the right to do. And so the intrusion of that was profound to me, and I knew even at 6 years old that baby steps to tyranny were tyranny. So
Yeah.
I couldn't rock it. And then they wanted me to say Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm like, for what? I'm not even free. I got to ask your permission to go fish. Fish. Fish! I still cannot believe that shit.
Well said. It's music to my ears. We get caught up in arguing about all these specifics. And now this fishing conversation. This is the real big conversation. This should be number one on the agenda.
Right? Because it's
Because
talking about our own ability to perpetuate, and so, it's talking about our ability to dictate our own destiny, similar to what we were just hinting at, in a very, very functional way. People don't understand that what authority actually is. When you're walking down the street or driving down the street and authority intersects with your life, they are claiming the ability to arbitrarily take your situation and make it a situation that they can then determine what happens to your physical body and time and energy and stress levels and thought. They're claiming the ability, they own you.
so
They're
it's
claiming
ownership.
of you. They're
Yeah.
claiming ownership of you. That's what being detained is. And all of these things are very anti-human. And they're not something they one of the things that the people who run this place had to do was get people to think that those concepts are inherent. That's why sustainable indigenous cultures had to be dealt with by capitalism, because not only were they self-sustaining and didn't need capitalism to survive, but it has to be ingrained in you that there is valid authority in strangers. That's not something that any indigenous cultures had. Not any indigenous cultures of any color or type or phenotype or genotype had authority vested in strangers. Most of them had chiefs, which were consultants, and they did not have jurisdiction over people as individuals aside from the cultural affiliations one might have. Like, I respect my uncle, and I respect my uncle's mentor if he introduces him to me, and I want to ask him, like, but there was no, I'm going to detain you and I'm going to put you in prison and I'm going to take 3/4 of your labor. And if there was, it was adamantly fought against, and it wasn't organized.
Right.
It was an organized situation.
True tribal structures of organization, they mimic or they emulated the family. They emulated nature. So this is that's all it was. Yes, there may be a decision maker in the family. Oftentimes there needs to be, and oftentimes it's going to be the father, right? It's going to be the male when it comes to a decision like, okay, how are we gonna climb up this mountain or get our food today, right? But now this is a big stretch to go from that to fishing licenses to permits, and the worst, the big one to me that I just can't get over is confiscating, taking money off the side, over 40% of your earnings, to then be put into a pool to be used for what? I mean, this is pimping. This is straight up criminal behavior. And it is so incorrect to apply that to the original tribes and the original indigenous human beings. It's absolutely not what they were doing.
Nobody operated like that. It's not human nature to operate like that. And what's worse is that this system rightfully, there's so many hints inside of statism, inside of the belief in government, that it's not legitimate because it has to tell you. But one of the biggest hints is that they literally tell you that it's consent of the governed, that we are equal under the law. If we are all equal under the law, then government could not exist. And I've known that for quite a while. I just didn't know how to articulate it.
Yeah.
It's a mathematical impossibility for us to grant each other things, abilities that individually we don't have the right to do. And it's that very simple understanding that people don't want to get. My question is, what do people get? I think that, because my question is, what do people get from believing the lie? What do people get from from excusing shit that to the rational mind is like, oh my God, I can't believe that's even happening in the real world. What do they get? What do they benefit? Some people will say a lot of people have privileges, and those privileges afford them the ability to stay blind. But that just doesn't do it for me, because you're sacrificing your own freedom. You're sacrificing, like, who wants to go get a fishing license? And especially when we know now that the lakes, the aquifers, the water is not being taken care of. That capitalism negates that. So why are we using permits as like licenses to drive? I hate when people say, well, if we didn't have licenses to drive, people would act crazy on the road and not know how to drive. Have you been on a road lately? Have you driven anywhere in the world? Anywhere in the United States especially, have you driven anywhere? Because you would know that licenses and permits and fees do not determine how well someone drives, how courteous, considerate, or aware of their position on the road they are in society at all. So those are the tropes and like those are the parts of it, the psychological parts of it that I just do not understand. You're making up a situation that doesn't exist in order to literally justify something that shouldn't exist. Most people on the road do not drive well. They all have, 99% of them have driver's licenses, registration, insurance, all these predatory forms that are literally chains on our freedom and our right to travel. And yet you will argue that without the paperwork, they would magically be better drivers? Or with the paperwork, they're better drivers. Without the paperwork, they'd be what? Just driving head first into walls without the paperwork?
You know, I was driving next to someone who had a flat tire today on the highway. And of course, you know, they of course were licensed, but I think licensing and permits, who they really keep out of the ranks, who they really who they hurt the most are the people with the most self-respect. And that's what this comes down to. It's not that about the fishing licenses. It's not that we have a right to kill 1,000 fish or eat. It's not about that. It's about self-respect, that you want to go with your son, with your children, to go into nature, and you want to have the dignity to just express yourself and interact with your with your loved ones and nature freely. So it's all about self-respect. But then if you need to go bend over and get on your knees or do whatever it is, even if it's just putting your finger in the air and then you'll get the permit, that moment is the moment that kills the human spirit. This is already making us slaves, that one moment. And it's self-respect that we're missing, and that's what all the permits are for, you know.
I don't understand how people don't see that. The way you just said that, even just putting your finger in there, like Mark Passio said, doing something just because you're told to do it already is immoral. If somebody tells you to do something good, if somebody tells you to go feed 100 homeless people or 100 people that don't have, and you go do it only because they told you to, having not even applied your own conscience to the situation, then it's still an immoral act. It's still bullshit. And that's the problem. People don't have the self-respect, like you say, because part of my whole thing was, and being offended by the imposition of permits and fishing licenses and taxes, is that I just couldn't believe that if we are all presumed equal under the law, which I know we are, I know what rights are, I know the information now, I know the structure and the principles behind it now, I know that. But it didn't make any sense even further if we were all equal under the law and we were all agreeing on that, and we can still determine that some people, because then who is the ones that are determining how much that permit is? And all those things, those are arbitrary parts and doesn't matter. But like you said, even just if they tell you to do something and that is between you and exercising your freedom, and think about it, it never works in practical terms, meaning even though the consent of the government, we are governed by the consent of the government, or we don't, like, if I walked up to you and said, Konrad, bro, you could totally go in there and have a beer right now, but you have to pop lock one time before, to me, you have to, if we're not even on the phone right now, if we're not on the live doing a show, you need to call me up and do a video call with me, and I need to see you pop lock, just one good wave, and then you can exercise your ability. Or what if I charged you $1? You gotta cash at me $1 and do a pop lock in order to have a beer for the night. It doesn't matter what arbitrary BS that the tyrannical regime is demanding. It is the act of, and that's what I keep telling people, government doesn't want you to obey. It wants you to want to obey. And that space is infinitely worse. Plenty of people have obeyed against their will throughout time for various reasons. But the ones who want to obey, are profoundly broken as individuals, because who are they obeying that is equal under the law, and to what ends and for what means? So, and it's crazy because we grew up as the minority, bro. I grew up as, like you said, 30 years, man. I've been in basically the Count of Monte Cristo, locked in a cell, and there's nobody else talking about what I'm talking about. There's nobody else. For years, when I was in school, it cost me all the pussy in the world. Like, when I would meet a girl, I wouldn't sit there and be like trying to fuck. I'm sitting there like, so what are we going to do about this government thing? Did you hear about what happened in the Middle East? Did you hear about Saddam Hussein? Do you know what's happening in the rainforest? And I sound like a nerd to them because I'm talking about things that they view as that over there. And we're not intelligent enough to deal with that over there because we're regular people, and you're a regular dude. Why you care about that stuff?
Isn't it just a tragedy that the one thing that should make a woman be attracted to a man the most is the thing that's gonna make her think twice about letting him in? You know what I mean?
Traditionally, it's changing. It is changing, and that's the thing. I was in a TikTok, like, again, it was the same platform with all the other black creators, content creators on the platform, and they said, well, you're not with a black woman. Why is, that's not pro-black? And I was like, well, I never said I'm pro-black. I'm pro-human. I'm pro-earth more than I'm pro-human. And so I said, I look for certain physical features that I appreciate on a woman, but I was looking for an anarchist. And there weren't too many anarchists of any color out there. And so I was working with a limited pool. I just so happened to find an anarchist of a specific skin tone. She doesn't identify as white internally. Externally, this is how we have to talk about these things nowadays. Externally, she would be identified as white. I don't internally identify as black. Externally, I would be identified as black. And what we do talk about is I do identify with the experience of being black because I have lived that experience and don't have a choice. And my wife identifies with the white experience because she has lived that experience. What are you doing here? Look at these. Look at this one.
Yeah.
Now go. No. Go ahead, talk.
And you got a beautiful family, man. That's the important thing. That's the only thing we need to identify with. Beautiful human family. And as far as we're talking about identifying, I identify as your brother in this war first and foremost, and then as a friend, and that's what matters. And nobody else can say anything to me about that. I know who I am. I know who I'm talking to, and this is how we can get stuff done. At the end of the day, we're a family, you know.
We are a family, and it's crazy because we all are that. Even when we talk, a lot of times these people who are having these conversations that they don't know, like, people didn't know that their family members were racist before this whole last maybe 5 years. Yeah. But we all live in proximity to each other. This is why when I talk about one of the things EvolvingSeeds.com is big on is sustainable or intentional communities moving forward to take the weight off of us economically and with this increasing cost of living. And we talk about communities, and people are always like, well, I don't know if I could live around a bunch of liberals. And people are saying, well, I don't know if I can live around a bunch of conservatives. And I'm like, what the actual fuck are you talking about? You live around them now. You work with them. You drive next to them. You stand next to them in line at grocery stores. You say hi when they pass by the street. We don't actually all hate each other. We actually hate what they've made us become. Yeah. And that is because when you look on both sides, that is the reality of what is happening. You got people who are trying to become what they always could have, identified as maybe the left, and knowing that there's this tyrannical regime in place that is preventing that, and still appealing to the tyrannical regime for that kind of change to get to the space where you can express yourself as who you are. And then there's the so-called rigid right, who identifies that there is encroachments on their identity and the foundational principles of the way this country was set up, and they identify the problem too, but they also want to appeal to the fucking source of the problem to solve it. And so and then again, the third party, the real true third party, which is people like us who don't want to play that fucking game at all. And all of us are still family. All of us eat, sleep, shit, and fucking fuck. Like, we are all human beings at the end of the day. And I know we say that in like this cliche form, but what that really means is that we are obligated to an extent to each other to progress our understandings of each other, whether we like the shit or not. Like, everybody thinks that everything that we're going to be doing has to be comfortable. That's a part of the American privilege. Everything's not going to be comfortable. I've had to have excruciating conversations with people. Excruciating for them and excruciating for me. Excruciating for them because of me and excruciating for me because of them. And we ate through that shit, and we are still friends today.
Yeah.
We are people who communicate even better now. But that's the place we all have to get to, because people don't have an understanding of what the timeline we're on, especially in the TikTok activist world. The level of their discussions and their concepts and their axioms that they're developing, even the ones that they're developing themselves, are so rudimentary and basic, and we are way past that time period. Like segregation, I'm like, if you think there's a large amount of black people who want to be segregated, and I understand their concerns, I empathize with why they would want segregation at this point. At the same time, I don't think that shit is feasible at all. We're in an increasingly diverse, homogenizing world that is, and rightfully so, becoming a place where everybody lives everywhere. And so I just don't see encapsulating. What we are doing is trying to fight the encroachment of being consumers and capitalism on our culture and our inherent culture and heritage, to be able to return to a more sustainable and indigenous form of living in the face of capitalism. So that's the real fight. But we can't, there's certain aspects of activism which I understand. That's what my point I'm making. But I don't work towards them. Like, you won't see me working towards helping black people segregate from white people as a concept, because I don't think it's feasible to actually do. If I did, I would help the fuck out of them. I would start New Wakanda right fucking now. You know what I'm saying? Where the Chinese doesn't need to go to Africa to help infrastructure. The Russians don't need to be there for this, that, and the other. We've already kicked the British and the English out, and the French out. I'm for that if it's doable and how it's doable. And it is doable, but not within the framework of all the content of excluding. And I know I'm not saying with the segregation of black people from white people, I'm not saying that that's something that is inherently good or bad, but I'm saying, or not doable. I'm just saying I don't think that it's something we could do right now. And so I work toward the principles of activism, so that if some little activist out there who wants to do that and thinks that it's more feasible than I do and want to put the time and effort into starting that, has the tools, has the toolbox to communicate that with somebody like me and move past all the fucking bullshit to get to an understanding of, we can move forward. Me and this person can move forward together because we're on the same page. So that I don't care what you're fighting for, as long as it's not the United States government.
I like what you said. There's a lot to say about that. And so I'll say this, and it's not so much even as a response to you, because I agree with what you're saying. I just want to inject my little piece into it. Please. You said a lot about the segregation, and it's actually an interesting convo, because I like that convo, because really what I care about is not segregation. I care about the self-determination. So if we're talking about this, you should you have the right to do that. But the segregation, and I think segregation is a problem. It's a big problem. But I'm talking about the segregation that's in here and in here, and this is the big fight for me. We're already segregated with each other here. So before we even worry about society, when we worry about races that we identify with, there's segregation to be fixed over here, because we need to be integrated as a being to even have the ability to decide to be segregated or integrated with other individuals. We're not complete individuals now. And the same thing you talked about the capitalism, this is another way we're split, because we hoard ourselves out to a system. We pimped ourselves out mentally and spiritually already. So this is a problem we already have internally before we even go outside of it. So I like that you mentioned those things, and I would always interject that I'm all for that kind of activism too. I'm ready to throw my shoulder in, and I'm ready to get my hands dirty. Right. But we gotta, like you said, you always take it back to principles. And I'll basically give the floor back to you. I feel like I'm just getting started, but we just wanted this to be a little bit of a teaser. We're going to talk again soon. Before I give it back to you, I just wanted to tell anybody who's watching this, EvolvingSeeds.com is a big website. It might not look like it at first, but you go there, you go to the neophyte section, or the elementary, I think, ES elementary,
Yes.
and that is well done, and I saw that. I see it on your website. So talk about anything you want, just tell the people anything before we before we call it a night. But I just wanted to
what
go
you were
ahead.
saying with the segregation too, and the segregation of self and integrating that self. My point, you made my point, you enforced my point, which is beautiful, because the integrated person, the integrated being, is not concerned with segregation. At a high enough level of activism, you're just you seek right and truth for its own sake at the highest level of activism. So it is lower level activism to seek segregation. I understand it's coming from a traumatic place. It's coming from a hurt place, and I understand it. There are communities that are forming and will form that are women only because of the trauma women have endured because of men. Yeah. So that is something that is important. That's something that is valid and important to facilitate. But I would argue that the highest level of activism is for the women to go there, or for the two women to go to a segregated place, or for the black people to have a segregated place, and for there to be enough healing globally, communally, and individually that more and more people will leave that place eventually, or it will be desegregated, meaning the woman's place, the woman community, will have men in it. We'll get to a society that men are more welcome totally at that, or a place where there's a 50 or 60 years of a community that's all black, where it's intentionally black and it's a safe space for black people. Maybe after 60, 80 years, that place is starting to dissolve and more people are moving out, or more people who are not black are being able to move in because the world is healing. Like I said, the communities are healing and the individuals are healing. But at high enough activism levels, you're fighting for humanity. And even more so than that, I would argue it gets deeper than that, because I'm not fighting. Like, if I had the ability to Thanos snap all of humanity out of existence, including my own beautiful kids right now, done. It'd be done. I wouldn't even wait for the power to go. I wouldn't even go say bye. I go say bye on the other side. That's how sick this society and this world is. I wouldn't even go say bye to my kids and my family. I would just give it up, do it on the other side. If I had the power right now, done. But that's because I'm an activist for my host. I'm a white blood cell to something greater than myself, which is my host organism, this beautiful planet that I live on. So I'm not a humanist. I have a friend who is admittedly a human supremacist. There are male supremacists out there. There are white supremacists out there. There are black supremacists out there. There are Asian supremacists out there. There's supremacists in the homes of each individual family unit. There are supremacists and supremacy everywhere, and I don't want to participate in that shit. And so the only way that you can be not a supremacist is if you understand how nature works and understand that nature is the cradle. And have you ever seen the movie The Book of Eli with Denzel Washington?
Oh, yeah.
Do you understand that he's blind in that movie, right?
Huh.
Did you know that?
No.
Yes. Nobody is aware of this. I thought it was just like a few people, but apparently nobody's aware of this.
I mean, it was a while ago, so I don't want to, totally misrepresent my position, but I don't remember. Like, if I would have known that, I would have remembered that. So, no, right. I do not remember him being blind as part of that movie.
He's blind, and the entire point of the movie is that every step he took was an absolute faith to God. And you can say, if you don't use that term or subscribe to a God, I would call it just the universal binding forces and sources of nature. If you walk in your truest path, it will cradle you and you will be taken care of. You follow the laws, you will be taken care of. Like, there's a scene in the Book of Eli where it's like the first scene, he's walking and he hears a crow and he turns around, and they always hint at this, and he's wearing these thick old glasses, and he turns around and he shoots the bird with an arrow so he can eat it. but he's blind. And I know, like, and what's crazy is that I tell Christians that movie because this movie is a Christian. It's a movie about faith. It's in the faith department when you look up, what kind of category it is.
Yeah, biblical name.
Right. He, every step that he took throughout the movie, he said, I was being called by God to do a certain thing. At the end of the movie, the Bible that he's been holding the entire time is Braille, but he's been reading. How many people do you know that are not blind that know how to read Braille?
Oh yeah, then that's obvious. I must not be remembering that, as well. But
I've met people who absolutely adore that movie, and not only did they not know that he was blind, they know the movie well enough to fight me about it and say that he wasn't blind. I'm like, imagine how much more profound this entire movie is if he's blind, and he's blind. So if you guys didn't know that out there in the Book of Eli with Denzel Washington, he's blind, and at the very end they even show his eyes, and his eyes are fucking milky white.
Oh, that's alarming. That just shows you that I don't remember that movie. This was a while ago, but that is alarming because I just said that so confidently because I remember the movie. I don't remember him being blind, and you tell me there are people that are going to tell you that.
There's a scene in this movie where there's a blind woman who's in the community because blindness happened after there was nuclear weapons, so many people are blind. But there's a woman, and Mila Kunis's mom is in the room, and she's blind. They say she's blind, and she's standing there, and Denzel Washington is in the room, and she walks in, and they just stand there, because all they've heard is footprints, because they're both blind. They just stand there for a full minute, and then he says, "Well, one of us is going to have to say something for me to know who I'm talking to."
Oh,
you see what I'm saying?
It's only right. It's only right because look at our species. That's a perfect example. You just outlined it right there. We're blind to even knowing what blindness is,
bro. And if that ain't a metaphor, but the reason why I brought that up is because to me that's what activism is. Like when you look at people like Martin Luther King, and which is a cliche, but Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Huey P. Newton, as far as even just the civil rights spectrum. They were people who were living inside, not just like Jiddu Krishnamurti was a philosopher and he did great things, but when you're talking about application of activism, the civil rights movement is the best place to look because it's like the principles in motion, and it was very specific. Like there's when I am in my activism, it's magic. It's magic. And activism to me is a synonym for life. There is no distinction for me between activism. In a perfect world, I would be an activist about my soup. My soup's not hot enough. Or my soup's too cold. That in a perfect world, there would still be smaller forms of activism for self. And yet, in a world this fucked up, most people would not identify as an activist. But it's to the point where even Google is defining, when you Google what is activism, the definition of activism, it said someone who campaigns for political change. That is the most drab and sad fucking activism. Do you know what activism in its highest form to me is for humanity? Is basically Star Trek without all the orders and fucking, but the efficiency, the logic, the highest self for the highest cause is activism to me. Like I don't know if you're a Star Trek fan, but when you watch, it's not the quasars and photons, it's that in every situation, and it's not like a military to where, you're imposing on other beings, but you're utilizing the highest forms of technology and the highest forms of humanity to engage reality and to get the outcome. Like especially you watch the new Star Trek movies, they are crazy good. There's they shoot a guy from one spaceship to another spaceship at like 4,000 miles an hour. And because there's no friction, it doesn't hurt him, but there's a bunch of debris. And one of the Vulcans is like, you have a 0.03259 chance of making it to that thing, because the other door he has to go through is like the size of a regular fucking door. And he's traveling through space at 3,000 miles an hour, and he's like, you have no chance of making it. And he's like, yeah, but the best part about being a human being is to be able to not give a fuck about that statistic and still make it through that door with room to spare through all that space debris, and it's a miracle. That's a fucking miracle. Every week I would watch Star Trek, I would see them pull a miracle out of their ass and save over 3,000 people. And the way they did it was literally, it was in alignment with the probabilities and the what I would call the quantum physics of how it was done. So if we're going to save the world, like Mark Passio talks about, there are prerequisite steps that need to be taken. And we as activists, we as those who do activism, we are required, not by some authority figure, but nature itself, for us to do a good job of what we're doing. We're required to acknowledge, understand, unpack, and process the inner workings of activism, of ourselves, of the problem. We are not, just like a doctor has to understand medicine and the human body, an activist has to understand socioeconomics. They have to understand environmentalism. They have to understand the non-aggression principle. They have to understand rights. They have to understand sovereignty, anarchy. That, like, you cannot separate anarchy from activism. You can't. Because if you're not an anarchist and you're trying to do activism, what you're trying to do is further help somebody impose on somebody else.
Yeah, it's super interesting because I never would have described what I do as activism. So this is setting up a real interesting conversation that I'm looking forward to, you know.
You're
But
an activist, buddy.
I
That's
could,
what EvolvingSeeds.com is all about, because
yeah,
you're an activist. If there's a man out there right now who's respectful of women, and I'm not talking about some cliche, I'm a protector and blah blah, but respecting women in the sense that he's conscious of how well he leaves them the fuck alone. And is a good father to his kids, goes to work, doesn't bother anybody, doesn't pick up any trash. He doesn't litter, but he doesn't pick up any trash. He doesn't write his congressman. He doesn't tree hug. He's not out there protesting. He's still a fucking activist. There's somebody out there right now that doesn't harm anybody. They don't support government, and they're just worried about their weight, and they want to lose 150 pounds over the next 12 months. They're a fucking activist. As long as you don't advocate strangers having authority over you, it's okay, go. As long as you don't advocate strangers having authority over somebody, it's okay. Then, and you can come in too if you can close the door.
come on in.
Right, and here comes, oh, thank you, baby. I thought it was number 2. Look, that's the baby. As long as you're not harming anyone, advocating harming anyone, supporting harming anyone, excusing harming anyone, justifying harming anyone, or harming anyone yourself, whatever you do in your life is activism. I have a homeboy. He was like us. He wanted to tell the world, oh my God, we have to save the world. It's under attack. Humanity's under attack. And he's done so much research. He's dug so deep down the rabbit hole that all he wants to do now is snowboard. He is completely certain that we have failed and that we are riding out the last couple decades of a failed experiment, a lost humanity, and all he does is snowboard and go around with his dog chasing snow into Colorado. He does not go to protest anymore. He used to be a big protester. He does not do videos anymore. He has completely ceased his activism. But what he doesn't do is harm other people or advocate them being ruled by strangers. So he's still securing, respecting, and executing his activism. Activism is everything. And that's how they get everybody to not contribute by doing their activism, is by making them think that that's somebody over there. So many people said, you're not Martin Luther King, you're not Malcolm X, you ain't gonna change the world. I'm like, but Malcolm X and Martin Luther King changed the world, and they were just regular motherfuckers. Did you think that they had some kind of super cape power? Did you think that they were Professor X? Did you, like, what do you think distinguished them from being just regular people, aside from being just regular people who did what they had to do? That's it. And so you're doing what you have to do in order to improve conditions. That's an activist, period, point blank. And that's everybody who's doing that. But more and more, without that refinement, imagine how many people are executing activism, are theoretically executing activism, but they are, part of their activism is suggesting that people appeal to the state, right? Their congressmen and shit like that. They tree hug, they love the environment, they want to make the earth a better place, but they want to write the congressman to do that. You see what I'm saying? Their activism is stifled. It's stagnant because it's not conducive. It's contradictory to itself. You can't ask the principal harmer of the environment to help you save the environment.
Yeah, their activism is just the ism without the act. You know,
Right,
that's what it is.
right,
But I'm gonna have to let you have the last word on that, and I'm gonna have to end it there. So one more time for everyone. That's my friend Michael Morris of EvolvingSeeds.com, and just anything else you want to bring up, because I'm gonna stop the recording now. I'm gonna make sure this goes up without anything crashing on me, and then
right.
I'd be happy to revisit this next time where we actually do our full conversation.
Right, and we'll talk about it later, but we can actually do this a little bit more regularly, like twice a month or something like that, because we do
Absolutely.
have the ability to work off of each other, because people have to understand and see these things from different perspectives. Like, I love the work you did with the Jason Aldean video, because I still refuse to watch it, because I knew inherently my boss wanted me to see it, and I'm like, bro, I know. He's like, it's not racist, it's not racist. I'm like, bro, you show me that video and I'll tell you when I'll see something racist. And within the first 4 seconds, I was like, that's racist. And he just couldn't understand. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, bro. You can say that you don't understand and then it's not racist. And then you ask me my opinion and I'm telling you what it is. And you're not going to accept it because you really never cared in the first place. You just wanted a black guy to tell you that it's not racist, but it is. And like, I loved how you hit it, because even though you're someone who is is immersed in hip hop culture, it doesn't always mean that you have the experience of being a black person. But you came with the experience of being someone who's not a black person, who could still identify the various ways that this is racist, statist, authoritative, propaganda, the bullshit. And so that, like, it was so beautiful, and that's why I don't know if you know that, but I put your Jason Aldean rundown on my TikTok.
I didn't even see it. I just got TikTok after you told me a couple weeks ago. So
I'm gonna tag you in it.
thank you,
When I
man.
get off, because I just took that. It was a very important piece, because there weren't enough. You're not familiar with TikTok, so there's not TikTok pandering going on with you at all. Not that there would be, but some so-called white, what they're calling YT on TikTok, white content creators who are advocates for black people, they will do the same rundown and say why the Jason Aldean thing was racist, but it'll sound differently because everybody's used to them defending everything about black people, black culture, and so the white people who watch their TikTok will just immediately negate everything they say and not care. But the way you presented it was very middle America. It wasn't like it was like a regular white dude being like, "Hey, bro, that shit racist." You know what I'm saying? Not a pro-black content creator saying that shit was racist. He was like a regular dude, like, "Hey, I understand. Like, I listen to some kind of music, and I see why you wouldn't think it was racist, but that shit racist. And worse than that is statist." So that's what I like about, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I appreciate you, and we can go ahead and cut it now. EvolvingSeeds.com, Konrad Rogoz. Yeah, man, I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for joining me. Don't hang up yet. I'm just gonna stop this, make sure everything